I think as a society, we kind of venerate confidence and kind of prowess and strength from men, and it's seen as a kind of attractive trait, and it's kind of drilled into us that that's something we should aspire to.
Being black, being gay, and all of that abuse, there was a lot. I didn't necessarily know I had this healing to do. I just knew I wanted whatever I was feeling to stop, and I didn't know how to make it stop.
You told us about August 2015. This is when Jake took his life, an unimaginable tragedy for you to experience. Matt, it is so lovely to speak to you today. Thank you so much for being on the Happy Place podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You sent in such a brilliant email that myself and the whole Happy Place team loved reading, because it was an excellent illustration of total self-awareness, of looking at your own vulnerabilities and being completely honest, which we all massively admired. So we're going to talk today about quite a few subjects, but the catalyst for those subjects is a breakup that you experienced in 2022. And this led to quite a lot of soul searching for you. And what I loved in the piece that you wrote about this breakup was the fact that you could see with hindsight what had contributed to the end of that relationship in a really honest way. What do you believe caused that relationship to end on your part?
I mean, on my part, I recognize that I made a lot of mistakes. So, there were things that in hindsight I would have liked to have not done and that I'm not necessarily that proud of. But I think the biggest thing, I mean, after the breakup, I was really engaging in a lot of self-reflection, but also quite heavy self-blame as well, and kind of looking for answers and not really finding them. And so I kind of gravitated towards, I mean, the first thing I learned about was attachment theory. And I think that was a real eye-opener, because I started to realize that I have this insecure attachment style, that I am anxious. And I started to realize that there were patterns in my behavior where I was kind of sabotaging the relationship. And that was connected to, my anxiety and my mental health challenges that I've had for a really long time, but I haven't really confronted them. And I think this was a real wake-up call to say, okay, there are certain ways, there are patterns in which I'm behaving in a relationship, and in life in general, I suppose, that I really need to fix, that they're not healthy. And I think this relationship just brought them out to the fore.
Tell
There's a
me a
really
bit
good,
more about attachment theory, because I think this is a term that many of us will hear floated about, but we might not necessarily understand exactly what it means. So how did you discover that terminology, and how did you see that you were acting in a way that matched what you were reading about attachment theory?
yeah, so attachment theory is essentially about what kind of relationship you had with your primary caregiver, i.e., your parents, when you were small. Um, and depending on how they reacted to your needs and how emotionally present they were, etc., that kind of determines, or at least plays a role in how you perceive adult relationships. Um, so I think I just realized that there were a lot of anxious behaviors that I was exhibiting with these kind of core fears around abandonment and of kind of not feeling good enough, I suppose. And that had an impact on my behavior in a relationship and how I reacted to conflict resolution or communication. So there were lots of patterns where I just wasn't really able to navigate a relationship in a healthy way. And I realized that that was in part, at least, due to these childhood experiences of, how I related to my parents, but also childhood experiences at school and with other people. So essentially, attachment theory says you either have a secure attachment, in which case you have a kind of healthy or a healthier relationship with your parents, and they kind of meet your needs, or you have an insecure attachment, which is more either anxious or avoidant, where you tend to, there was perhaps an inconsistency in the way that your parents looked after you or met your needs. And so that means that you also develop an inconsistent approach to relationships, and there are kind of core fears and concerns around them.
I mean, this is deep work. You know, having that realization for a start is humbling, I would say, because I know these feelings of when you have a realization like, wow, I didn't even know I was acting like that. And you start to see patterns and you start to understand why relationships have broken down, or you've experienced challenges that keep cropping up and keep cropping up. It's a really difficult thing to have that awareness, but to make change is a whole other kettle of fish. So how did you start to move towards positive change so you could write the things that you felt weren't correct, that you were perhaps not dealing with things as well as you could? How did you start to implement that change?
Yeah, that's a good question, because for the longest time I was reading about all this stuff and thinking, I recognize all these patterns, I recognize all these challenges, but how am I going to dig myself out of this and change? And I think I just eventually, after a long time reading about all of this stuff, I just thought, well, that's enough. I've read enough now. I know what I need to do, which is I need to work on myself. I need to actually put all these things into practice. And just starting to say yes to things. I mean, a big part of it, I think with any breakup, you sort of start to have a more, I guess, what's the right word? Not a gung-ho attitude, but you start to say yes to more things just to kind of keep busy. And I think a big part of that putting all these things into practice was just saying yes to things. And then being in the situations where I could react differently to a certain circumstance in a healthier way, in inverted commas. So it was just a realization that I'd reached the end of kind of what I could read about, essentially, and I was feeling so low at the time that I just thought the only way to dig myself out of this is to actually put this into practice and work on myself and read books, and go to therapy, and just try and figure out how to be better ultimately.
It is a big ask for any of us to not bring childhood experience into the present, because it's so ingrained. Some of it we're not even aware of. So how have you found that, even in friendships, even in working environments, just everyday transactions with other humans? How have you found it? Is there a much greater self-awareness now of those moments where you're reacting from a place of your childhood experiences and how that's formed who you are today?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot more. It doesn't mean that I react exactly as I would like in every situation. So it's still, I guess, the impact of those childhood experiences is still present, but I'm much better, I think, now at identifying when it can have an impact on a certain situation or interaction that I have. So yeah, I just go into things, I think, with a lot more awareness of how my childhood has impacted who I am today, and kind of looking upon my childhood with compassion as well, and saying there are certain behaviors that I've adopted now, and yeah, it would be great to not have those behaviors and to have some slightly different ways of doing things, but there was a reason for that, and it's not my fault, and now I'm working on trying to do better. So yeah, I think I just talk about in relationships, kind of bringing up certain things, just being a bit bolder about bringing up things that I think I was afraid to bring up before, and just thinking through, if I feel kind of triggered by something, thinking, why am I feeling this way, and taking a moment to kind of stop and then think, what's the best way for me to react to this situation.
Yeah, a beautiful pause. You know, none of us do this
Yeah.
enough in life. I'm absolutely guilty of not doing that essential pause before we respond to a situation or a trigger, and it can be absolutely game changing. Another important point that you put in your email to us was your thoughts around toxic masculinity. Tell me what you learned from this relationship about toxic masculinity.
Yeah, so I think it's a really difficult issue, because one of the things that I've struggled with, I think as a society we kind of venerate confidence and kind of prowess and strength from men, and it's seen as a kind of attractive trait, and it's kind of drilled into us that that's something we should aspire to. But at the same time, it seems from everything I've read and digested that to be in a healthy relationship, you also need that vulnerability, that kind of honesty, openness, vulnerability. And I think it's really difficult, because I think as men generally we get very contrasting messages around, you know, you need to be confident, you need to be strong, and at the same time you need to open up and tap into your emotions. And so I think toxic masculinity kind of doesn't really allow us to tap into our emotions. And I think my biggest realization perhaps is that difficulty, that kind of dichotomy between vulnerability and confidence, is quite a hard one to reconcile. But also that these kind of attitudes to masculinity aren't really helping men, because we suffer in silence. You know, if you look at the kind of statistics around mental health and suicide being I think it's the leading killer of young men still. So we're not kind of taught to, we're not kind of encouraged to tap into our emotions, and that doesn't help men, but equally it doesn't help women either, because we don't end up having fulfilling relationships where we're really honest and open with each other. So I think it's just taught me that it's really damaging for both sexes, really. And I don't know that I necessarily have the answers. You know, it'd be great to have the answer. I guess I'd be a rich person if I did. But yeah, it's just taught me that how much it impacts both men and women, and how damaging it is.
In previous relationships, have you found that quite suppressing, feeling like you weren't able to talk about things you were struggling with, or have conversations about issues that were perhaps mentally affecting you?
I think in previous relationships, yes, I was a little bit reluctant to open up, because because I felt I had to put on this confident veneer. I think I've become a bit more open as I've gotten older, so it doesn't, I think my problem sometimes now is kind of regulating how much I want to share and how much vulnerability I want to express. But I know with a lot of my friends, for instance, they've had issues with that in the past, and they've kind of been through therapy and been through, you know, a journey to try and be more vulnerable and to try and express emotions. But yeah, it's as I say, it's difficult, because I think we're not really encouraged to do that, and I think it's really damaging.
Yeah, that's very much why myself and the Happy Place team just thought your email was so interesting, because often, and certainly, you know, on this podcast and within my friendship groups, we hear a lot about the end of a relationship from a female point of view. You know, we've talked about heartbreak and ghosting on this podcast and other sort of complex relationship fallouts, but I don't think I've heard many men talk about their feelings, not only of heartbreak and the loss of a relationship ending, but also the self-reflection element of, well, actually, a lot of the time, you know, for men and women, we can end a relationship and go, we can see all the flaws with the other person, everything that was wrong with the other person. They were this, they were that, this is why it didn't work out. But to turn the spotlight onto yourself, and I think as a man, is absolutely breaking down the barriers of toxic masculinity and allowing men to hear these points of view and these stories, and giving other men permission to go, yeah, that breakup hurt, but also what could I do to ensure that things feel healthier in the future? I think it's deeply important to do that.
Yeah, and and one of the things that's also, I think, really difficult is, of all the stuff that I was reading about and all the YouTube videos that I was watching, it wasn't that they were inaccessible to men. Obviously, anyone can read these books or watch these videos, but it was interesting how they were really predominantly aimed at women, and there weren't very many men engaging with this kind of thing. And so that also, I think, started to make me wonder about bigger issues around relationships and dating in, in current times. Is, are we creating an atmosphere in which men can talk about relationships and talk about vulnerability and learn about how to navigate relationships as well? Because we're not really taught how to be in relationships. We just kind of get thrown out into the world, and then we make mistakes, and hopefully we learn from them. But some people, I guess, might not learn from them and just carry on repeating the same mistakes. So it really made me think about, what can we do to foster an environment where we talk about how to communicate, how to resolve conflict, commitment issues, or whatever it might be, because it's a skill. And we go to school to learn certain skills, and that's a good thing, obviously, but we don't go to school to learn about communication or relationships, whether that's romantic relationships or friendships or, family relationships. It's really important, and yet it's really overlooked.
That's so massively overlooked, and it can be, life altering, especially if you keep repeating, as you say, the same issues, the same problems. You keep getting to the same dead end again and again. And like you say in your email, and you've touched on it briefly today, sabotage was certainly the flavour of issue for you, in terms of, ruining something that was quite good. Because what was the feeling? You didn't deserve it, or that was familiar to you? What was leading you to sabotage, do you think?
I think it's kind of a feeling of, as I said earlier, kind of not feeling good enough, which I think I've always felt to a certain degree throughout my life, and kind of being very kind of knee-jerk in my reactions to certain things, interpreting things in automatically the negative way, when actually, as I said earlier, if you can take that pause to think about what might be the alternative interpretations, you can see that there's actually a whole litany of different ways that someone might have expressed something that aren't necessarily negative. And other behaviors as well, of just kind of shutting down, of distancing myself, really being afraid of conflict, of this idea that as soon as conflict happens, it means that the relationship is over. And so doing absolutely everything to avoid conflict, even when it can just be a simple conversation, and the conflict can be resolved. So yeah, this is all the stuff that I read about, and I recognized all these patterns, and it was so eye-opening to read about. And as I say, I read all this and just thought, enough's enough. I need to fix this.
Yeah, and I guess to do that, you've got to have quite a decent dose of self-compassion, because whenever we have realizations about ourselves or our patterns, our behavior, we can easily go into self-loathing. I think most people will recognize those feelings of thinking, oh, I'm getting it all wrong. Why am I so flawed? But if you apply compassion to that self-awareness, that's where you can spark positive change.
Yeah, definitely. And at the beginning, I went through a lot of, as I said, self-blame, a lot of self-loathing, and thinking, how could I have behaved this way? But it was also learning about things like attachment theory and childhood experiences that I realized that these were patterns that were kind of subconscious, really. So I was just playing out patterns that unwittingly were familiar to me. And so that's where I think that helped me get some sort of degree of compassion with myself, because then I thought, okay, well, these behaviors can be fixed, and they're not really my fault because they're so deeply ingrained, but I can work on them and change them. And that allowed me the compassion for myself that I needed to then not just identify these patterns, but actually say, okay, let's work on fixing them.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. It's so brilliant. And I'm really grateful that we've had this conversation today, because I think it's one we really need to have. And it's also one that we haven't really had on this podcast out of the 200 and whatever it is episodes that we've done now. I don't think we've heard about the end of a relationship from a male point of view in this way. And I think it'll be hopefully very relieving for other men. It might spark interesting conversation between couples. It might really help people that are, coming out of a relationship and feeling a little bit lost. I think it's a really needed chat, and we're very, very grateful for you being here today, and we're really grateful for your beautifully articulate email. So thank you so much, Matt. It's been a joy to talk to you today. Thank you for being on Happy Place.
Thanks very much, Fearne.
Sam, thank you so much for talking to me today and for being part of Happy Place. We're so glad to have you here.
Oh, the thanks is mine. Like I said a minute ago, like I'm just thrilled that I got asked to do it, got invited to do it. So yeah, I am buzzing is probably the word. I don't even know. It's just, I'm so happy. I thought I wouldn't sleep last night, but I actually slept really well.
Oh, good. I know that's always the absolute pits when you're sort of excited / nervous about something and sleep doesn't come. I have that very, very regularly. We absolutely loved reading your email. You very generously shared your story, which is full of challenges, but also really full of hope, which I know is what you really want to come across today, that we can deal with life's challenges and we can still have a great life and be very hopeful. So let's go back to the start of the part of the story that you've told us, which is your childhood, where you were growing up in a predominantly white area as a black child, and then coming to terms with your sexuality and coming out. How did that period of your life affect your mental health?
Oh God, I don't think I realised how much it affected my mental health until I got to my early 20s, and my world sort of just fell apart, really. Because you just, as a kid, you're just going through life, aren't you? You don't know any different. It's not until you start to sort of think about your identity when you get in your teens and then you start to grow that you start to question things. So I don't think it really hit me all until maybe my late teens, early 20s. And I didn't know how to cope with life. I didn't know who I was. I hated the skin I was in. I hated my hair. You know, it was just, at that time, I did feel suicidal in my early 20s. I felt very weird. I knew very few black people, only my mother and my brother and sister. And I didn't know anyone that was gay. And back then, I'm quite old, so there was literally 2 or 3 TV channels. So there wasn't really a lot on TV for me to take reference from. There was no internet. So I had no outer view of me. I didn't see me or any way, shape, or form in the world. So I felt very isolated. And yeah, like I just didn't really want to be in the world, to be honest with you. I didn't feel like I fitted in.
And what were your coping mechanisms, beneficial or detrimental at the time? Because often we look back and we can see, that was a coping mechanism. I can look back and think that about the eating disorders I had in my 20s. There was a period where I just saw them as terrible flaws and things I was getting wrong, but actually they were coping mechanisms and they weren't beneficial, but I was doing the best that I could at the time. What coping mechanisms were you using to navigate that period of your life?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I think I used a lot of alcohol, especially in my, teenage years and early 20s. I was smoking at about the age of 11, which, couldn't get my hands on anything else at the time. So that was what I was using. I did a little bit of self-harming. I really just hated myself. Those were probably the predominantly things that I used to get through that time. And a lot of self-hatred was just involved, self-loathing, feeling like I didn't fit in the world. So I had a big negative narrative going on in my head, and I didn't know how to express myself. and I just used to use alcohol, and yeah, that was pretty my main vice back then, I guess. Yeah.
At what point would you say you realised those coping mechanisms weren't working for you? At what point did you think, right, I need to do some healing. I need to look after
Mm.
myself. I want to feel happy in my skin. I want to feel self-compassion and self-love. When did that hit?
I think I became very depressed. I wanted to take my own life, and I did actually call the Samaritans back then, and they were immensely helpful. And I did go and see my doctor the next day, because obviously I think somebody on the line, I can't remember the conversation exactly, was like, go and reach out, get some support. So I went and saw my GP. My GP was amazing, and got me some therapy, which was a big turning point. I had that therapy for 2 years though, because obviously I had a lot of stuff around my identity, about the sexual abuse as a child, being black, being gay, and all of that abuse. There was a lot. I didn't necessarily know I had this healing to do. I just knew I wanted whatever I was feeling to stop, and I didn't know how to make it stop. And luckily, the therapy helped me unravel that.
Yeah, and that's been the start of an amazing journey for you. And I don't necessarily like that word, but I think it does
Me
describe
either.
how, well, it's hard to find another word that fits the bill, because it is this long-term experience of learning and growing, which we're all desperately trying to do, but you
Mm.
not being flawed by these challenges that you face. As you said, it was extremely severe. You were suicidal, and you wrote very poignantly about what stopped you from doing that. If you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about the turning point from being very close to actually seeing that through to not, and to then turning your life around.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I just had a lot of therapy, and it was really beneficial, and it helped me. I think the point you're referring to is the point that when I was in 2019, when I had which is about a 30-year gap, I should imagine, and then I became depressed and suicidal again, because I had three things that happened very quickly in my life. My marriage broke down, so I got divorced. My dad died and my dog died, all within 9 months, and it's that compound effect of those little trauma, not little traumas, they're bloody big traumas. And dealing with one is okay, and there's some psychology around this, like how humans can deal with one and maybe two, but we get three or four, then things really start to, the shit show happens, and that basically is what happens with me. I didn't know how to cope, and I came very, very, very close to taking my own life. Yeah, it was just my heart is racing. Like, yeah, like I wrote letters to my family. I planned it. A lot of self-loathing came in, because I felt like should have been able to cope better doing what I do for a living. I'm a life coach. I help people. I love helping people. I love life. I just had all this pain, and I didn't know how to make it stop. And luckily, there was just, weirdly, like, somebody reached out to me who I didn't know very well. And it was on the day, wanted me to go to an event on the day that I planned to take my life. And it was a business awards, and she said, "Oh, come and sit on the top table with the celebrities. I'd love to have you as my guest." And I was like, I don't know why this woman's inviting me, but anyway, she invited me. So that had a changing moment, and the love that I got in that room that day was incredible. Like, nobody knew what was going on inside of me, that this is where my mindset was at. And I had this white, I always call it my white light moment, where I sat in my car, and it was like I wasn't in this world. It was just white light all around me, and I was in so much pain I just couldn't even see my own reality. And somehow I managed to pick up the phone and call the mental health services, because my GP had given me the mental health services number, because I had been to see my GP to say, look, I can't cope with this. And yeah, I just called that number. I don't even remember dialing the number. I remember having the conversation, but I don't remember dialing. And I had a conversation with somebody for about 20 minutes. And 20 minutes later, I felt okay. And I always say to people who are struggling, like, sorry, not saying sorry, it's okay to cry. Just wait 20 minutes because you don't know how you're going to feel. I went from my white light moment to 20 minutes later feeling like, okay, I can go another hour, I can do a bit more. And I used that reference as I got through that really tricky period of my life. When I've ever been struggling since, of like, okay, just give it 20 minutes. And it has massively helped me. So yeah, I think that was the bit that you were referring to, probably.
Yeah, and I massively appreciate you going into such depth with it, because I I know from having conversations like this regularly, it's not easy to go back there. You're telling the story with words, but you emotionally you revisit these places, and it's not an easy thing to do, but it's incredibly helpful to tell people that there is hope and that there is another option. And I think it's incredibly, I want to use the word practical without it sound reductive, but it's practical
Mm.
to say, give it 20 minutes, see how your mindset could change in that 20 minutes by having human connection, by talking to someone. I think it's incredibly important to hear that, because often when there's very low mood, depression, circumstantial devastation, whatever's going on, we
Mm.
tend to look years ahead. We go, well, how will I ever live forever with this pain? How could I possibly stick around forever with this pain? But to deal with 20 minutes, that's doable. To
Yeah,
do life in 20-minute segments is doable. So I think
exactly.
not only have you shared something incredibly powerful, and I massively appreciate that, but I think what you're saying is incredibly helpful and hopeful as well. And I think it's really interesting, the work that you do as a life coach. I think it's, again, even more powerful to say, this is what I do for a living, but you can still go to those depths. You're a human. You're
Yeah,
going to have an emotional reaction to what's going on circumstantially, to your past, whatever might be happening, and that's okay. And I think actually that lived experience just gives you even more depth to then communicate and connect
mm.
with the people you're working with. And this continues because you've got a new set of challenges that you're currently dealing with that relate more to your physical health. So tell us how you're using the tools that you've learned over the years in your profession, but also personal life, and your incredibly built up resilience that is hard earned to
Yeah,
deal with what you're coping with physically at the moment.
yeah, yeah. Life is just it's a roller coaster. It's just amazing. Um, Thank you for that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, it's made me a better life coach. Like, I am a way better life coach than I was 4 or 5 years ago. I know it. I'm now doing my greatest work. It has way more meaning and purpose, and I absolutely bloody love it. Um, but yeah, recently, last March, I came back from Costa Rica. I went on a solo trip around Costa Rica. Girl power,
Yes.
My Julia Roberts moment. It's like,
Yes.
I'm going it alone, and off I went. And my dream has always been to coach and get paid and travel the world at the same time. So I did that. Went to Costa Rica. I had all my clients online. It was amazing. And then I came back from Costa Rica. I felt crap. Like, I was like, 2 weeks later, I'm like, I still can't be feeling this crap from jet lag. And my iWatch just kept going, your heart rate's low, your heart rate's low. And to be honest, it's probably done that for about a year and I'd ignored it. But it just happened like 4 times in one day and I was feeling really unwell. So I thought, I better go to the doctor. I went to the doctor and they were like, oh, your heart is like doing some crazy shit and your blood pressure is really, really high. And I'm like, I've never had high blood pressure in my life. I'm fit, I run, I spin class, I do all sorts. And he said, no, you can't exercise. And I went, what, like not anything? And he went, no, not at all. And like exercise for me is like
Yeah.
meditation. Um, we need to have you back here in the morning. And I went out to dinner with my sister that night. We went to see Jonathan Van Ness, and the doctor called me at dinner and was like, I just need to talk to you really quickly. And so she ran through a whole bunch of things, and she just said, look, you know, if you get any chest pain, any shoulder pain, any jaw pain, you need to call 999. And I was like, suddenly I felt very anxious, you know, like what the hell is going on? And we need to see you here first thing in the morning. So like, so all of that happened. The upshot of that was I had a lot of scans and tests, and I had a cardiologist who was amazing, said, this is urgent, we can't ignore this, your heart is beating 3 times as fast as it should be, so you've got an excessive amount of burden on your heart, so you can't exercise at all, nothing, which literally, you know, that kind of already plummeted me into a bit of a depression, because I'm like, I have to work out. And then they did a scan of my head in the hospital, because when I was in Costa Rica, I fell and hit my head. And one of the things with my heart and my blood pressure, they thought I might have a blood clot. And because I'd hit my head, they went, we're just going to check. So 2 weeks later, they checked and everything. And then my cardiologist called me and said, look, I need to tell you something, because you're going to get a letter tomorrow, and I don't want you to be shocked. But there is a growth on your brain. And I was like, a growth, like, what does that mean? You know? And then I got the letter the next day, and obviously I figured it out anyway, or despite her medical terminology. And my cardiologist is wonderful. So yeah, basically I was told like 2 weeks later that I had a brain tumor. So my life massively changed. Like at that time, I was sleeping, sitting upright in bed, because I was frightened that my heart would fail. I was frightened to die. I was too scared to go to sleep. And yeah, I don't even, yeah, it was just the craziest of times. Like I was thinking like, God, shit, I haven't lived. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. What if I, you know, what if I don't wake up tomorrow? And I've got so much to do, like my message about, you know, all the stuff I talk about every day. And, you know, I'm always motivating people, and I haven't done enough of that. And I haven't been on enough platforms like this, and all of these thoughts through my head. And I was just shit scared, quite frankly. And I had to tap into all of the stuff that I've been teaching and sharing and using anyway to get through life's challenges, but to a greater degree. And I think my heart is now fixed, which is amazing. My blood pressure is still not as great as it should be, but my brain tumor is something I'm having to learn to live with, and it scares me every day. But equally, I'm thriving every day, and I'm learning to live every day by tapping into all of the great things that life has to offer, you know. And uh, one of the ways, I think the greatest way we can heal, and maybe you've done this, I think you probably do this because of the way you do the podcast, is we can heal ourselves by helping others. And I don't know, I've heard a lot of your story, and I think this is quite healing for you, this. Maybe, am I
Yeah.
right? I don't know.
You're very,
Yeah.
very right. I live for this shit. You know, having these conversations is not only amazing to be able to, it's a privilege, quite frankly, to sit and listen to storytelling and to hear different perspectives and angles of life. But I do think it is extremely healing. You can't have these conversations and connections without some self-reflection, self-awareness, some progress, some growth. I don't think it's possible to have these chats without that. So I think,
Mm.
you know, what you're doing with your life coach work must be really underpinning all that, you know, all of the messaging that you understand to keep
Yeah.
you feeling strong. But I wonder, in times of extreme anxiety and fear around the unknown, how you turn towards hope. How do you do that?
I have this hashtag that I use a lot, and I've shared it for years. Everybody knows who knows me. So it starts with you. I say that a lot, and that's probably what I say to myself every day. Like, I can't control the brain tumor. You know, I've changed my diet and done some things massively, you know, in terms of trying to change a few things, but I can't change that. I can't change what's going on in the world. The one thing, and for all of us, you know, you, me, Anushka, whoever, we are our greatest asset, our longest commitment. And we are the one person we get to spend 100% of our time with. So everything has to ultimately, how I see the world and how I see this podcast and how I see literally everything going on around me, comes through me and is of me. So it starts with me. So I have a choice, and sometimes that choice is freaking difficult to make. Like when I want to feel pain, sure, I lean into it, and I, like Brené Brown says, lean in, lean in. Well, you've got to learn to lean in and go through. And I think that's it. It's like, okay, have your moment, have your cry. I learned as a kid, we didn't cry. Like, stop crying. What are you crying for? through breath work and stuff like that, I'm now a breath work teacher as well. It's like I've learned to cry and just lean into it. And if I feel shit and I feel sad, I'm going to have my cry, and I'm going to go and do a bit of deep breath work, and I'm going to yell and get it out rather than suppressing it and pushing it away like I did, like about the abuse as a kid and all of those things that I suppressed, which built up and bubbled up and became something quite huge. I don't allow that to happen now. It's like if it comes up, I'm dealing with it head on, whether that's breath work, meditation, going for a run, calling my girlfriends, screaming, whatever. I'm grateful for literally every day. And I do feel, and this might sound a bit woo, and I'm definitely not really woo, but spooky, but I know there is more for me to do. And I think this podcast, weirdly, like, I don't know how you pick me. Like, but I know that the universe is conspiring for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the word pronoia?
No.
Pronoia is the opposite of paranoia.
I
where
love
it's
this.
yeah, it's a great word, right? It's my TEDx talk. I haven't done it yet.
That's the
Pronoia.
next thing to manifest on the list.
Yes, it is. The next thing is like Happy Place official festival, please. Little
Yeah, we're going to
slot
get
on
you
there.
down.
Yeah, I would love to. I'm going to hold you to that first.
No, you can hold. I'm a loyal person. You can hold me to that.
Oh, because I know you've got spaces, so I'd love to do a session there. Maybe it can be around pronoia. I don't know, but
I love
pronoia
this
is the
term.
opposite. Yeah, it's the opposite of paranoia, and it's where the universe and the things that happen to you are conspiring for you and not against you. So with my brain tumor, it's like, okay, this is happening for you, like because I have worked bloody hard to get recognized and noticed for what I do, and I love what I do, and the universe is probably just bringing me things to help me deepen my message, refine my message, impact in a deeper way and in a bigger way. And it's not easy to look at it like that, but I do look at it like that. And that's how I get up every day. It's like it starts with you, Sam Adams. What are you going to do today? Like, how are you feeling mentally, emotionally, and physically? I check in with myself. And I ask myself honestly, and I either voice note it or I write it down, and then I go, okay, what do you need now? What do I need mentally for my mental well-being? What do I need for my physical well-being? What do I need for my emotional well-being? And the highest form of self-care and self-love is to give it to yourself. And so many people don't. And I fucking well do. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, you can
I
swear all you
do.
like. We're a sweary zone.
Yeah, I know.
love
I listen to you.
I love the word pronoia. I'm taking that, I'm putting that in my pocket, and it's going to stay with me because it's such a brilliant mental shift and mindset. It's I love that. I mean, this whole conversation has been absolutely full of insight and also takeaways. And again, I don't want to use that word reductively, but it really has. I think anybody out there going through anything, remotely challenging to devastatingly challenging can connect with your story, but also really learn from how you have dealt with and are dealing with life's challenges. And it's a really powerful message. And I've loved talking to you, Sam. It's been brilliant having you on. It's been an honor to hear your story and for you to feel safe enough to tell that story. That feels like a privilege as well for you to do that in this space. I really appreciate it. And
No, you've made it very easy.
well, thank you so much, Sam. And we'll see you at the Happy Place Festival. We'll get this year or next year. We'll make it happen.
That would be amazing. Can I just say one more thing, because you did ask me about like how I get up every day.
Yeah.
And I have this two words that I say, which is non-refundable. Well, non-refundable day. It's 3 words. And I've used this for a long time, but it's even much more of a stronger message now. And it's the same for all of us. Every day is a non-refundable day. You can't get to the end of the day and go, oh, I want to redo that again because I messed it up. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I wasn't intentional enough. And it's important for us to remember that we're all ending in the same way. So treat every day as your first day, your last day, because it's your only day and it is non-refundable. So give it the best you can. It doesn't mean fake. It doesn't mean trying to be a 10 out of 10 when you're a 5 out of 10. It just means be real. You don't always have to do the right thing. Be real and see every day as non-refundable. And I think that's something I embrace. I encourage a lot of people to embrace. And even when it's a little bit tricky, it just means we give it a little bit more than normal.
Yeah, there's no take 2, that's for sure. You've got to give
No.
it your all on whatever days you're given, and it's a beautiful message. And I love the fact that it's not about getting it right every day, living
Mm.
life to the max. It's about being real. That is a very, very important message again. Sam, you're brilliant, and I love talking to you. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
No, thank you. It's been amazing, been an absolute privilege. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello, Mel.
Hi, Fearne. Lovely to be here.
Oh, Mel, thank you so much for being on Happy Place. Where are you today?
I'm in Greater Manchester. I'm in Bury. I live in Tottington.
Sun shining today?
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yeah, it's lovely. Really nice. Yeah.
I know, we're not going to complain that it's too hot. We're just going
No.
to deal with it because it's better than it being cold.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
We're loving it. Well, look, it's a real joy to have you on Happy Place, and we're utterly grateful for your email telling us your story so beautifully. And I really want this to be an opportunity for you to be able to tell your story in your time, in your words. And I'm so grateful that we can do that today. So you wrote us an incredibly eloquent email about your late son, Jake. To start off with, would you just tell us a bit about what Jake was like?
Yeah. So Jake was my only child. He was absolutely lovely. I'm sure I'm biased, but growing up, there were no mental health issues that you could certainly put your finger on. Maybe perhaps with hindsight, I don't know. And he went through his teenage years. He was quite confident. He was warm. He was quirky. He was quite articulate, but at the same time rather immature, if you like, because he was a boy and he was still very young. Um, he was traveling with friends and going to festivals and making his way in life. And he was really passionate about photography, and he took up a degree in contemporary photography. And he just finished his first year of that when drastically things started to change. And that was just 10 months before he died.
So during that 10 months, what did you notice? What changed about Jake's behaviour?
In Jake's situation, it was quite drastic. Um, he became impulsive, reckless, extremely challenging, and his mood swings were rapid. And his behaviour was so completely out of character. Just sort of emotionally challenging, just getting angry, inappropriate things, and it wasn't necessary to be so angry about something, which just was so far apart from what he was normally like. And it was clear there was something very wrong, and he knew himself that there was something very wrong. We just, at that point, didn't know what that was.
Yeah, and for you as a mother, that is an incredibly stressful thing to go through. How did that impact you?
It it's hard to look back and think how I did cope with how those 10 months kind of panned out and what happened. Um, but I think you go on autopilot and you just do what you need to do or what you feel is the right thing to do at that time.
I mean, this was made in an incredibly complicated time because
Yeah.
your son was actually refused a mental health assessment because of substance misuse. Talk to me about that period.
Yeah.
How frustrating that must have been to not get him the help that he desperately needed at this time.
Yeah, it was soul destroying to watch. And what happened was Jake obviously realised something wasn't right. He deferred his second year of his degree. He took himself to his GP, and unlike many males who struggle to reach out and to talk about how they're feeling, Jake didn't fit that mold. He couldn't have shouted any louder, and I'm so proud and privileged that he shared everything with me, and he spoke to me and he trusted me, and he talked to me about the substance misuse, and so on, and he knew that he could trust me. So the situation with the sort of being denied dual diagnosis was because I found out around this time in sort of January 2015 that Jake had been self-medicating, using diazepam, benzos, other things off the internet, which obviously, apparently, that's quite not popular, common,
Yeah.
but extremely dangerous. Now, to cut to the chase, Jake more than likely had bipolar. I don't say that lightly because I've spoken with a number of people who did spend time with Jake, professionals, and so more than likely there was something like that really underlying that was coming to the surface as he was sort of 22, 23. And so self-medicating using benzos was making that worse. It was, sort of amplifying the ups and the crashes and so on. And that's why now I understand his behavior and how erratic it was and how chaotic life became
Yeah.
for quite a few months after that. So Jake did go to his GP. I built a bond with his GP as well, and visited many times with and sometimes without Jake. Um, and at that time, I guess his hands were tied because Jake had told him that he was already addicted to diazepam. He already had a dangerous tolerance for that. So for that reason, at that time, he was told he wouldn't be assessed or have any mental health in the community support, and he had to deal with the substance misuse, which we took as it is. That was how it was, and that's the path that we went down. Following procedure, following instructions, doing what we thought was right. Because the idea then was that Jake would get support. He needed a safe prescription to be weaned off benzos, which apparently takes time. It's complicated in itself and not easy. And once we got to that kind of point, then he'd be more stable and able to assess him, which I understand. I understand it's not always the right thing to have a mental health assessment when you are taking and using chaotically also recreational drugs at times, and sort of diazepam, benzos, if you like. So yeah, we were trying to follow what we were asked to do at that time.
Yeah. Which is a lot for you to cope with, and was a lot for Jake to cope with without having proper mental health support in
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
It's a very big ask to do
yeah,
that.
yeah,
In the email that you sent us, you told us about August 2015. This is when Jake took his life, an unimaginable tragedy for
mm,
you to experience. And alongside that immeasurable grief, you were also asking yourself a lot of questions. One of them was, is suicide preventable? Which is something that I know has played on your mind a
yeah,
lot. But also, this led you to take the advice of the coroner, which was to ask another question, which is, what would Jake's experience be like today? And I'd love to hear a bit more about what you learned by asking that question and the subsequent investigation.
yeah, yeah. So those 10 months were really complex and chaotic, and Jake was, to cut to the chase, he was passed from pillar to post. There was so many lovely individuals and organizations there to help Jake, but in many ways we were all isolated, trying to bang on that door individually, and it was disconnected. So Jake didn't get a safe prescription, and he didn't get any mental health support, and that was really the tragedy of everything that happened. So the inquest was a real sort of turning point for me, in that the coroner saw everything that I'd seen and more, and she issued a regulation 28 to bring about changes for future to ensure there were, to prevent future deaths, if you like. And she made a number of recommendations, and those recommendations were about bringing services together, working together in a different way, than they had done previously in that particular area, when Jake was poorly, and at that time when he took his own life. For the first 2 years after Jake died, I really did, I was totally consumed by everything. And I think I put in my letter to you that just before Jake died, I weighed about 6 stone 10, and that was just purely just the stress, and the irony of that was I was able to look after myself after Jake died, and things were, calmer. So in the first 2 years after Jake died, I revisited, I followed up, all of the recommendations that the coroner made. I met with people who'd worked with Jake, people who hadn't worked with Jake. I met with medical director of NHS England in Greater Manchester, who was very sincere and very generous with his time. And I had conversations about what was changing there and then, which gave me at that time some confidence of that it was taken seriously and that changes were coming about. And then, grief and just trying to get on with your life and managing with grief and trying to be uplifting and do nice things and remember Jake. When it was 5 years after Jake died, which was almost 3 years ago now, I decided that I was going to ask a question that was so important to me. What would Jake's experience be today? And to go back to those recommendations, because if I don't see that change, then I don't really have anything. So I went back to some of the same people again, some different people, and I found writing really therapeutic, just to capture and not have to carry things around in my head. And what I found was really positive and really encouraging. And it's not even things that necessarily cost money. Of course, funding is needed. Of course, it is, and of course, it's needed. But you can, really, it's working with what you've already got. And it's about all the agencies who were involved with Jake, the young people's substance misuse, who were fantastic at that time. And they had to refer Jake to the adult service, which was difficult because they didn't have the skills that the young people service had, and so on. GP's hands were tied, and the mental health team, everyone thought they couldn't refer somebody who was being treated for, substance misuse. But they were so wrong, and this whole chicken and the egg thing absolutely infuriates me, because it's just about, you'll never get to the bottom of the chicken and the egg, and as somebody, what is their beginnings a mental health issue, or did that come later, or it doesn't actually matter. It's about the here and now and really dealing with that situation. So in a nutshell, those particular services that in the area where Jake lived and died, all the barriers that Jake came up against, they've all gone. He would be seen far more quickly by a clinical lead if somebody like Jake needed a safe prescription. And you might not get a prescription straight away. I understand that far better now than I did then. The doctor who said no to Jake on the 20th of May 2015, and that was a date and I couldn't erased from my mind for a long time, because I saw it as the sort of turning point when Jake decided that nobody could help him. It took me a while. The offer was always on the table for me to speak to her after Jake died and to find out more. I spoke to many people, but I couldn't face her for about 18 months. I think I wanted to kill her. I think I wanted to blame her.
Yeah.
So, I did sit down with her and talk to her and look her in the eye. I didn't like all the answers, but she put me straight on a few things. And, her job is so important. She needed to know exactly what Jake was taking and how much, because she has to really measure out that prescription. But he would know if Jake went to that same service today, he wouldn't be assessed and reassessed and reassessed. It would be much quicker. And the answer at that point might still be a no, but there'd be a wraparound support until perhaps the answer, for whatever reason, might be a yes. And also within that sort of circle of professionals now, the mental health team can come in. It doesn't mean that you will get an assessment if you're taking chaotically, because I understand that's pointless doing that. but it doesn't mean you can't have some support along the way. You know, and what really stood out to me was that Jake's caseworker at Phoenix Futures was absolutely fantastic, and Jake had a great relationship with her, and so did I. And she felt, you know, so alone. And she took Jake, as I did, to the GP. You know, just a couple of weeks before he died, asking for mental health support for her as well, because she felt like I did, like, I don't know what else to do. Everyone just keeps sending him home, whether it be A&E or whether it be the GP or the adult substance misuse service. So, you know, bringing that team together, for me, it's not only supports that individual, the service user, but it supports everybody else who's supporting that person, whether it be your mum, you know, or your carer, your best friend, or whether it be your caseworker, or your GP about making decisions. So yeah, that was quite a turning point, really, to be able to let go of a few things, you know, because Jake's loss is just, you know, he was 23, like any 23-year-old, had everything to live for, and you know, it's just too tragic to dwell on. And that's, you know, kind of how I've tried to do uplifting things, positive things, to be able to move forward, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I got to that question, really. You know, is suicide preventable or is it inevitable? And I guess for me, the answer to that is, you know, it's preventable if the missed opportunities from the past are today's lessons learned.
Yeah.
You know, and it's small steps. You know, we're not entirely there, but there are good pockets of good practice going on and better practice
I'm
going
I'm
on.
so glad that we are seeing, as you say, small incremental steps in the right direction. There's still a hell of a
Absolutely.
lot of work that needs to be done, but um it's incredible that Jake helped push that in your area. He helped create incredibly necessary change.
Absolutely.
And that's the most beautiful thing. It's amazing that you've been able to get the positive outcome to
Outcomes,
how
yeah.
these situations are dealt with. And the answer to that question is a positive one. There's room for progress, there's room for growth, but there is growth and there is progress there, and that is a good thing. And I know it can't take away your pain and it can't change anything for you personally, but it is incredibly important that this progress is being made, and
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing that Jake was part of that. It really,
Yeah.
really is. You spoke so eloquently and beautifully about your son and your pain and the entirety of your story, and I really appreciate that, because I know it's not an easy thing to do, especially, you know, you've never met me, you've never sat with me in a room before, and you did it so beautifully, and I'm really, really grateful, because I think your story, but also the information that you've been able to attain from being through such a process is hopeful for people. It's hopeful for people that there is more help and that positive changes are happening. Um, and I'm so grateful that you sent us your story, that you emailed us. It's incredibly courageous to do so, not only to write it down, but to say it out loud. So
Mm.
thank you for being massively courageous today and for sharing your story with us. We are incredibly grateful, Mel. Thank you so, so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I'm proud of Jake because it is his voice. If he hadn't, you know, told his mum everything, he didn't have to. A 23-year-old boy, then I wouldn't have known the half of it. There wouldn't be those changes. So yeah, I am proud, very proud of Jake. Thank you.